The morning sun shone through the windows of the Network One building in downtown Washington, D.C. Inside, the busy staff of American Viewpoints, one of the nation's most watched political talk shows, rushed to prepare for that day's broadcast. Papers shuffled, coffee cups clinked, and voices called across the studio floor as the clock ticked closer to airtime. In her dressing room, Jasmine Crockett checked her appearance one final time. The Texas representative smoothed her navy blue blazer and adjusted her gold necklace. She had been on television many times before, but today felt different. The producers had only told her yesterday that Candace Owens would join the panel. Jasmine had faced tough opponents before, but Candace had a reputation for bringing unexpected angles to discussions. 5 minutes, Representative Crockett called. A young man with a headset as he poked his head through the door. "Thank you, I'll be right there," Jasmine replied with a smile that masked her nerves. She gathered her notes and took a deep breath. The topics for today were supposed to be tax policy and infrastructure spending, areas where she felt confident in her knowledge and positions. Down the hall, in another dressing room, Candace Owens sat still as a makeup artist added finishing touches to her face. Unlike Jasmine, Candace appeared completely at ease. She scrolled through her phone, occasionally smiling at something on the screen. "All set, Ms. Owens," the makeup artist said, stepping back. "Perfect, thank you," Candace replied, standing up and smoothing her red dress. She picked up a leather folder from the side table, something she hadn't brought to previous appearances on the show. Nancy Wright, the show's longtime producer, knocked and entered the room. Nancy had worked at the network for 15 years and had seen her share of tense political confrontations. "Ms. Owens, just a reminder that we agreed to focus on economic policy today," Nancy said, her tone professional but firm. Candace smiled. "Of course, Nancy, but you know how these discussions can evolve naturally." Nancy frowned slightly. "We try to keep our guests informed about the direction of the conversation. It's only fair to everyone on the panel, and I appreciate that," Candace said, still smiling. "But I think the viewers deserve the whole truth about certain matters. Isn't that what journalism is about?" Before Nancy could respond, another staff member appeared at the door. "2 minutes to air, Ms. Owens." In the studio, 4 chairs waited on a raised platform. Bright lights shone down, and cameras stood ready. The show's host, Peter Johnson, a gray-haired man with 30 years of broadcast experience, reviewed his opening notes at the desk. He looked up as Jasmine entered the studio. "Representative Crockett, good to see you again," Peter said, standing to shake her hand. "Always a pleasure, Peter," Jasmine replied. The third guest, an economics professor named Alan White, was already seated, organizing his papers. He nodded politely to Jasmine as she took her seat. Candace entered last, her red dress standing out against the blue studio backdrop. She greeted everyone with warm smiles and handshakes, acting as if this were any normal broadcast day. 30 seconds. Called the floor director. Peter took his seat and put on his professional broadcaster face. The other guests straightened in their chairs and checked their microphones. And 5, 4, 3, 2... The floor director pointed silently to signal they were live. "Good morning and welcome to American Viewpoints," Peter began, looking directly into the camera. "Today we're discussing the economy, tax reforms, and infrastructure spending. Joining me are Representative Jasmine Crockett from Texas, conservative commentator Candace Owens, and Professor Alan White from Georgetown University. Welcome to you all." The cameras panned across the guests as they smiled and nodded. "Let's begin with the proposed tax reforms," Peter continued. "Representative Crockett, your party suggests increasing taxes on corporations and the wealthy. How do you respond to critics who say this will slow economic growth?" Jasmine leaned forward, ready for this familiar question. "Thank you, Peter. The data simply doesn't support that criticism. When we look at periods of higher tax rates historically, we often see strong economic growth. What really drives our economy is a strong middle class with money to spend. Our plan directs relief to working families while asking the most fortunate to pay their fair share. Peter nodded and turned to Alan. Professor White, what does the economic research tell us? As Alan began his academic explanation, complete with REFERENCES to recent studies, Candace opened her folder and flipped through some papers. The movement caught Jasmine's eye, and she felt a flicker of unease. When it was Candace's turn to speak, she started conventionally enough. The problem with raising taxes is that it assumes government spends money more wisely than private citizens or businesses. History suggests otherwise. Jasmine prepared her rebuttal, but Candace wasn't finished. However, Candace continued, her voice taking on a different tone. What viewers might find more interesting is some information I've recently uncovered. Peter looked confused. This wasn't on the agenda. Ms. Owens, we're discussing tax policy. At the moment. This is relevant, Peter, Candace said smoothly. It's about consistency and transparency in governance. She turned to face Jasmine directly. Representative Crockett has been a vocal critic of corporate influence in politics. She's built her brand on fighting for the little guy against powerful interests. Jasmine nodded cautiously. That's correct. I believe elected officials should represent their constituents, not special interests. An admirable position, Candace agreed. Which makes these documents all the more concerning. She pulled several papers from her folder and placed them on the table. The camera zoomed in on what appeared to be emails and meeting schedules. What exactly am I looking at? Jasmine asked, her voice steady despite her growing concern. These are records of private meetings you've held with executives from Northland Energy, Global Pharmaceuticals, and Tech Future Industries, Candace explained. All companies you've publicly criticized, all meetings that were kept off your public schedule. The studio fell silent. Even Professor White looked uncomfortable. Peter tried to regain control. Ms. Owens, if you had evidence you wanted to present, the proper protocol would have been to inform us before the broadcast. I'm simply responding to Representative Crockett's comments about representing constituents rather than special interests. Candace replied. The public deserves to know if her private actions match her public statements. Jasmine took a moment to scan the papers, her mind racing. She recognized some of the meetings. They had been legitimate policy discussions, but the way they were presented here, stripped of context, painted a different picture. These meetings were part of my information gathering process, Jasmine said, keeping her voice level. I meet with various stakeholders to understand issues fully before forming policy positions. Yet you denied these particular meetings when the Dallas Morning News inquired about them last month. Candace countered. In living rooms across America, viewers who had tuned in expecting a standard policy discussion suddenly found themselves watching something far more dramatic. Joe Martinez, watching from his apartment in Houston, put down his coffee mug and turned up the volume. Susan Clark in Michigan called out to her husband, "You need to see this." Back in the studio, Peter Johnson looked at his producer off camera, silently asking for guidance. Nancy made a slashing motion across her throat. Cut to commercial. We'll continue this discussion after a short break, Peter said quickly. As the on-air light went dark, the studio erupted. Jasmine turned to Candace, her professional demeanor slipping. This is completely inappropriate. You ambushed me on national television. Candace merely raised an eyebrow. I thought you believed in transparency, Representative. Peter stood up. Both of you my office now. As they walked off the set, the floor crew exchanged glances. They had seen political disagreements before, but this was different. Something big was happening, and they all knew the real fireworks would begin when they returned from the commercial break. Peter Johnson's office was small but comfortable, with awards and framed photos covering one wall and a window overlooking the city on another. He closed the door firmly behind Jasmine and Candace, then turned to face them. "What was that?" he demanded, looking at Candace. "We agreed on topics beforehand." Candace sat down calmly in one of the chairs across from Peter's desk. The topic was Representative Crockett's economic policies. Her meetings with corporate executives directly relate to those policies. Jasmine remained standing, her arms crossed. "This was a planned ambush. You could have brought these concerns to me directly or through proper channels." "Would you have addressed them honestly if I had?" Candace asked. "That's enough," Peter interrupted. "We go back on air in 3 minutes. Representative Crockett, you have 2 options. We can continue the discussion including these allegations, or we can stick to the original topics and address this another time." Jasmine took a deep breath. Running from the accusations would look worse than facing them. "I have nothing to hide." "We can discuss it," Peter nodded. "Good, but I need both of you to remain professional. No interrupting, no personal attacks. This is a news program, not a reality show." Both women agreed, and they walked back to the studio. The crew watched them carefully, sensing the tension. Nancy Wright approached Jasmine before she took her seat. "I'm sorry about this," she whispered. "We had no idea she was planning this." Jasmine nodded slightly but said nothing. She took her seat, straightened her blazer, and waited for the cameras to roll again. "Welcome back to American Viewpoints," Peter began when they were on air again. Before the break, Ms. Owens presented some documents regarding Representative Crockett's meetings with corporate executives. "Representative, would you like to respond?" Jasmine looked directly into the camera. "Yes, I would. These meetings have been taken completely out of context. As an elected official, I meet with many people, including business leaders. My job is to understand all sides of an issue before making policy decisions." "But you specifically denied these meetings occurred," Candace pointed out. "The Dallas Morning News asked your office about rumors of these exact meetings, and your spokesperson said they never happened." The camera caught Jasmine's slight frown. "My office receives hundreds of media inquiries. Without seeing the exact exchange you're referring to, I can't comment on what might have been a miscommunication." "I have the email exchange right here," Candace said, pulling another paper from her folder. "Your communications director, Sam Fuller, wrote, and I quote, 'Representative Crockett has not met with executives from these companies during her time in office.' That seems clear enough." Professor Alan White, who had been silent during this exchange, cleared his throat. "If I may, I think we're straying from the economic discussion that viewers tuned in for." "With respect, Professor," Candace replied, "the public's trust in their representatives directly impacts economic policy. If Representative Crockett criticizes these companies publicly while meeting with them privately, voters deserve to know." In homes across America, viewers were now fully engaged. Mary Johnson in Florida called her husband from the kitchen. "Come quick. They're fighting on American Viewpoints." In a diner in Iowa, the owner turned up the volume as customers stopped eating to watch. Back in the studio, Jasmine leaned forward. "Let me be very clear. I have always fought for working families and against corporate greed. These meetings were fact-finding conversations, not secret deals. In fact, I challenged these executives directly about their company's practices. Then why keep them off your public schedule?" Candace asked. "Some meetings are kept private to allow for frank discussions without media speculation," Jasmine explained, her voice growing firmer. "That's standard practice for many officials. But you've criticized others for that exact practice," Candace pointed out. "Last year, you called Senator Miller's off-the-record meetings with bank executives suspicious and demanded transparency." The camera caught Jasmine's expression changing slightly. Her composure was slipping. "That was a different situation." "Entirely," she said, her voice rising slightly. "Senator Miller was working on banking regulation legislation at the time. And you weren't working on energy, pharmaceutical, or tech legislation when you had these meetings? Candace asked, raising an eyebrow. Peter intervened. Let's take a step back. Representative Crockett, can you explain the purpose of these specific meetings? Jasmine took a deep breath. The meeting with Northland Energy was about their plans to transition to renewable sources and how that might affect jobs in my district. The meeting with Global Pharmaceuticals concerned their drug pricing structure and potential ways to lower costs for consumers. And Tech Future Industries wanted to discuss their expansion plans, which could bring jobs to Texas. All legitimate concerns, Peter acknowledged. Of course they are, Jasmine continued, gaining confidence. But these companies wanted initial conversations without immediate public scrutiny. Once we reached any actual agreements or proposals, everything would have been made public. That's how governance works. Candace shook her head. That's convenient, but there's more. She pulled out another document. This is an email from you to your chief of staff after the Northland Energy meeting. You wrote, their donation offer is generous but too risky right now. Tell them we need to wait until after the vote. The studio fell completely silent. Even Peter looked shocked. Jasmine stared at the paper, her mind racing. She remembered the email, but not exactly as Candace had read it. May I see that? She asked, reaching for the paper. Candace handed it over. Jasmine read it quickly then looked up with fire in her eyes. This is not the complete email. You've selectively quoted it to change its meaning. The full context is right there, Candace insisted. Jasmine held up the paper. The complete sentence reads, their donation offer is generous but too risky right now given the perception issues. Tell them we need to wait until after the vote and public discussion to consider any campaign support. I was explicitly rejecting their attempt to influence my vote. Peter reached for the paper. Let me see that. As he read it, the cameras captured the moment perfectly. Jasmine's intense gaze, Candace's slight surprise, and Peter's furrowed brow as he confirmed Jasmine's version. Representative Crockett appears to be correct, Peter said after a moment. The full context changes the meaning significantly. Across the country, viewers leaned forward. The tide seemed to be turning. Candace recovered quickly. One misleading quote doesn't change the fact that these meetings were deliberately kept secret from the public. Not secret, Jasmine corrected, her confidence growing. Private. There's a difference. And I stand by my record of fighting for regular people against corporate interests. My voting record proves it. Professor White nodded. If I may add, Representative Crockett's voting record does consistently favor consumer protections and corporate accountability. The discussion continued, with Jasmine defending her meetings while highlighting her public actions against corporate overreach. As the segment neared its end, Peter turned to the camera. We're almost out of time. Final thoughts, Representative Crockett? Jasmine looked directly into the camera. I've always fought for transparency and accountability. Meeting with different stakeholders doesn't change that. Judge me by my actions and my votes, not by misleading accusations. Ms. Owens? Peter asked. The public deserves full transparency, Candace said smoothly. I believe voters will draw their own conclusions about whether Representative Crockett's private actions match her public statements. Thank you all for joining us today, Peter concluded. Tomorrow on American Viewpoints, we'll discuss the new infrastructure bill. Good day. As the on-air light went off, Jasmine stood quickly and removed her microphone. Her face showed a mix of anger and relief. She had weathered the initial storm, but she knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Outside the studio, her phone was already buzzing with messages from her staff. The video clips were already spreading online, and the real battle for public opinion was just beginning. Jasmine Crockett walked quickly through the hallway of the television studio, her heels clicking against the floor. Her assistant, Danny Powell, hurried alongside her, holding out a phone. Your chief of staff is on the line, Danny said. And your press team needs to talk to you right away. Jasmine took the phone. Ellen, I need damage control now. Ellen Morris, who had been Jasmine's chief of staff for 3 years, spoke quickly. We're on it. I've already released a statement explaining the meetings and emphasizing your voting record. The problem is that clip of you getting upset is spreading fast. I didn't get upset, Jasmine said, pushing open the door to her dressing room. I defended myself against false accusations. I know that, Ellen replied, but the 10-second clip making the rounds doesn't show the full context. It just shows you looking angry. Jasmine sat down heavily in a chair. Get me on another show. Today. I need to control this narrative before it controls me. Working on it, Ellen assured her. In the meantime, stay off social media. Don't engage with reporters yet. We need a clear strategy first. After ending the call, Jasmine finally allowed herself a moment to process what had just happened. Candace Owens had clearly planned this ambush carefully. The question was why, and why now? A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. It was Nancy Wright, the show's producer. Representative Crockett? Do you have a minute? Jasmine nodded, and Nancy stepped inside, closing the door behind her. I want to apologize for what happened out there, Nancy said. We had no idea Candace was planning to bring those documents. It's not your fault, Jasmine replied, though she wasn't entirely sure that was true. But I'd like to know how she got access to my private emails. Nancy shook her head. I wish I knew. This puts our show in a difficult position, too. We pride ourselves on fair discussions, not ambush journalism. Will you be issuing any statement about her tactics? Jasmine asked. The network executives are discussing it now, Nancy said. She hesitated, then added, just so you know, Candace is scheduled to appear on the Scott Morris show tonight. It looks like she's planning to continue this story. Jasmine's eyes narrowed. Of course she is. Thank you for telling me. After Nancy left, Danny poked his head in. Your car is ready whenever you are. I need 5 more minutes, Jasmine told him. She pulled out her own phone and called a number she rarely used. Bill, it's Jasmine. I need to know where these leaks came from. Call me when you find something. Bill Carter was a former journalist who now worked as a private investigator. If anyone could trace the source of the leaked emails, it was him. Meanwhile, across town, Candace Owens sat in a coffee shop with Greg Harris, her media consultant. They watched the clips from the show on Greg's tablet. It's getting good traction, Greg said, scrolling through social media reactions. The hashtag Crockett Corporate is trending in 3 states already. Candace sipped her coffee. Good, but she recovered better than I expected with that email. We need to shift focus back to the pattern of secret meetings. Scott Morris will help with that tonight, Greg assured her. He's already promoting the exclusive follow-up. But Crockett's team is pushing back hard with her voting record. She has consistently voted against corporate interests. Voting publicly one way while meeting privately another way is exactly the hypocrisy we're highlighting, Candace replied. Her voting record actually makes our point stronger. Greg nodded. The next phase is already in motion. We have 3 more documents ready for tonight's show, and the blog post goes live in an hour. Candace checked her watch. I need to prepare for the Morris interview. Make sure our supporters are ready to amplify the message once it airs. As evening approached, the story continued to grow. News websites posted articles with headlines like, Crockett confronted on corporate connections, and Owens exposes political double-dealing. Video clips from the morning show played on news channels throughout the day. In her apartment, Jasmine paced back and forth as she watched the coverage. Her press secretary, Zoe Miller, sat on the couch taking notes. They're completely missing the context, Jasmine said, gesturing at the TV. These meetings were legitimate fact-finding discussions. We know that, Zoe replied. But we need a simpler message that cuts through the noise. Something that ordinary people can understand and remember. Jasmine stopped pacing. You're right. What about knowledge isn't influence? I meet with everyone, from union workers to CEOs, but my votes show who I really fight for. That could work, Zoe said, writing it down. Simple and direct. Jasmine's phone rang. It was Bill Carter. You were right to be suspicious, Bill said without preamble. The email leaks came from inside your office. Jasmine felt a chill. Who? I'm still confirming, but all signs point to Ryan Wells. Ryan was a relatively new addition to Jasmine's staff, hired just 6 months ago as a policy advisor. He had access to most internal communications. Keep digging, Jasmine told Bill. I need proof before I make any accusations. After hanging up, she turned to Zoe. We may have a bigger problem than we thought. I need to speak with Ellen again. Jasmine dealt with the potential mole in her office. Viewers across America were tuning in to the Scott Morris Show. Scott, a veteran broadcaster known for his aggressive interview style, sat across from Candace Owens. My guest tonight made waves this morning when she confronted Representative Jasmine Crockett with evidence of undisclosed meetings with corporate executives. Scott began. Candace Owens, welcome to the show. Thank you for having me, Scott. Candace replied with a smile. Let's get right to it, Scott said. You brought documents showing Representative Crockett held private meetings with corporations she publicly criticizes. Why is this significant? It's about integrity, Candace explained. Representative Crockett has built her reputation on fighting corporate influence in politics. Yet she meets privately with these same corporations and keeps those meetings off. Her public schedule, Scott nodded. Her team says these were simply informational meetings, not negotiations or deals. That's what every politician says when caught, Candace replied. But I have more documents that tell a different story. She pulled out a folder similar to the one she had brought to the morning show. This is an internal memo from Representative Crockett's office regarding the meeting with Tech Future Industries. It specifically mentions discussing potential areas of legislative compromise and regulatory concerns. Scott took the paper. This suggests more than just an informational meeting. Exactly, Candace said. And there's more. After meeting with Global Pharmaceuticals, Representative Crockett's office drafted talking points that softened her previous criticism of the company's pricing policies. In her apartment, Jasmine watched the interview with growing anger. That's a complete mischaracterization. The talking points were updated because we got new information about their patient assistance program. Zoe made notes furiously. We need to request equal time on his show to respond. The Scott Morris Show continued, with Candace presenting more documents and Scott asking increasingly pointed questions. The narrative was clearly shifting against Jasmine. Halfway through the interview, Jasmine's phone rang again. It was Ellen. I've confirmed it, Ellen said, her voice tight with anger. Ryan Wells has been sending office documents to a private email address linked to Freedom Watch. Freedom Watch was a conservative advocacy group known for targeting progressive politicians. And now it made sense why Candace had these documents. Fire him immediately, Jasmine said. And prepare a statement about this. We're not just going to play defense anymore. As the Scott Morris Show went to commercial break, Jasmine turned to Zoe. Call every news outlet. We're going to expose this for what it really is. A coordinated political hit job. For the first time since the morning show, Jasmine felt a surge of confidence. She had been caught off guard initially, but now she understood the game. And she was ready to fight back. Across town, unaware of what Jasmine had just discovered, Candace prepared for the final segment of her interview, confident that she had successfully changed the public conversation. The battle for public opinion was reaching its climax, and neither woman was prepared to back down. The next morning, Jasmine sat in a conference room at her office with her core team. Ellen Morris stood at a whiteboard, writing down their plan of action. Zoe Miller was on the phone trying to book media appearances. Danny Powell monitored social media trends on his laptop. The mood was tense but focused. Ryan Wells has been escorted from the building, Ellen reported. Security is checking what files he accessed in the past 3 months. Good, Jasmine nodded. What's the status on our press release about the leak? It's ready, Zoe said, covering the phone with her hand. But we need to decide. Do we name Freedom Watch directly or just refer to a conservative organization? Jasmine thought for a moment. Name them. They didn't hesitate to come after me, and I won't pull punches now. Danny looked up from his laptop. Candace Owens just posted that she'll be on 3 more shows today. She's calling it her Truth Tour. Jasmine's phone buzzed with a text from Bill. Carter found direct payments from Freedom Watch to Ryan Wells. Started 2 months before he joined your staff. Call me. She showed the message to Ellen. This confirms. It was a planned operation from the beginning. They planted Ryan to spy on us. Ellen's eyes widened. That changes everything. This isn't just about leaked meetings anymore. It's about a coordinated attempt to infiltrate a congressional office. Exactly, Jasmine agreed. And that's how we changed the narrative. Across town, Candace was preparing for her next interview. Greg Harris showed her the latest social media numbers on his tablet. We're getting good engagement, he said. But Crockett's team is pushing back harder than expected. What are they saying? Candace asked, reviewing her talking points. They fired someone named Ryan Wells this morning. They're claiming he was planted in her office by Freedom Watch to steal documents. Candace frowned. That wasn't part of the plan. Freedom Watch was supposed to stay in the background. There's more, Greg continued. They've released a statement about the leaked emails, providing context for each one. They're also highlighting Crockett's voting record and public statements against the same companies. It doesn't change the fact that she had these meetings and kept them secret. Candace insisted. Greg looked uncomfortable. There's something else you should know. Wells apparently altered some of the documents before leaking them. Altered them how? Candace asked sharply. Changed dates, removed context, edited some of the language to make the meeting seem more suspicious, Greg admitted. If Crockett can prove this, it undermines our whole narrative. Candace stood up and paced the room. Why wasn't I told about this? I put my reputation on the line based on these documents. Freedom Watch assured us everything was legitimate, Greg said defensively. They didn't tell us about Wells either. Candace checked the time. My next interview is in 30 minutes. We need to adjust our approach. Focus on the pattern of meetings, not specific documents, and distance ourselves from Freedom Watch. At noon, Jasmine held a press conference outside her office building. Reporters and camera crews filled the small plaza. She stood at a podium with Ellen and Zoe flanking her. Good afternoon, Jasmine began. Yesterday, misleading documents were used to create a false narrative about my work as your representative. Today, I want to set the record straight. The cameras flashed as she continued. We have discovered that an individual named Ryan Wells was hired by Freedom Watch and placed in my office to steal and alter documents. This was a deliberate attempt to undermine my work and mislead the public. She held up a folder. I have here the original, unaltered versions of the documents that Candace Owens presented yesterday. They tell a very different story. Jasmine went through each document, explaining the real context and pointing out how they had been changed. She also addressed the meetings directly. As your representative, I meet with many different groups, from labor unions to community organizations to, yes, business leaders. My job is to listen to all perspectives before making decisions. But as my voting record clearly shows, I have consistently stood up against corporate interests when they conflict with the needs of working families. A reporter raised his hand. Representative Crockett, why were these meetings kept off your public schedule? Some preliminary meetings are kept private to allow for frank discussions, Jasmine explained. But the outcomes of those meetings are always reflected in my public positions and votes. There was no secrecy about where I stand on these issues. Another reporter called out, "Have you spoken with Candace Owens since yesterday's show?" "No," Jasmine replied. "But I would welcome the opportunity to have an honest conversation about policy differences rather than manufactured scandals." Meanwhile, Candace was appearing on the Laura King Show, a popular afternoon program. The host, known for her tough questioning, didn't hold back. "Candace, there are reports that the documents you presented yesterday were altered by someone working for Freedom Watch. Were you aware of this?" Candace maintained her composure. "I presented the documents that were provided to me in good faith. If there are questions about their authenticity, that's concerning to me as well. My goal has always been transparency. But you didn't verify the documents before using them to make serious accusations on national television," Laura pressed. "I had no reason to doubt their authenticity," Candace replied. "The core issue remains, Representative Crockett had private meetings with corporations while publicly criticizing them. But if the documents were altered to remove context or change meaning, doesn't that undermine your entire argument?" Laura asked. For the first time, Candace appeared uncomfortable. "I stand by my concern about the pattern of private meetings. If specific documents have issues, I want to know about that as much as anyone." Back at Jasmine's office, her team watched the interview. "She's on the defensive now," Zoe observed. "This is our chance to completely turn this around." Jasmine nodded. "Book me on the Laura King Show tomorrow. I want to face this head on." By evening, the story had shifted dramatically. News headlines now read, "Congress Office Infiltration Scandal," and Freedom Watch accused of planting spy in Crockett's staff. Social media buzzed with opinions from both sides, but the narrative was clearly changing. At her apartment that night, Jasmine received an unexpected call from Peter Johnson, the host of American Viewpoints, where the confrontation had started. "Representative Crockett, I wanted to personally apologize for what happened on our show," Peter said. "We had no idea about the planted staff member or altered documents." "I appreciate that, Peter," Jasmine replied. "Would you be willing to have me back on to address this directly?" "Actually, that's why I'm calling," Peter said. "We'd like to have both you and Candace Owens on tomorrow morning. A chance to clear the air with all the new information that's come to light." Jasmine didn't hesitate. "I'll be there." After ending the call, she texted Ellen, "Both Owens and I will be on American Viewpoints tomorrow morning. Prep team meeting at 6 a.m. Across town, Candace received a similar call from Peter. She listened carefully, then consulted with Greg before agreeing to appear. "This is risky," Greg warned after she hung up. "The story has shifted against us. Running away would look worse." Candace replied, "I need to defend my reputation. And I have questions of my own for Freedom Watch about these altered documents." That night, both women prepared for their rematch on national television. Jasmine reviewed the original documents and practiced her responses to potential questions. Candace worked on a strategy to distance herself from Freedom Watch while maintaining her core criticism of Jasmine's meetings. Neither woman slept much. Both knew that tomorrow's confrontation would be even more intense than the first. The public was watching closely, and both their reputations were on the line. As dawn broke, news vans were already parked outside the Network One building. The rematch between Jasmine Crockett and Candace Owens had become the biggest political story of the week. And in just a few hours, they would face each other again, this time with the truth about the leaked documents fully exposed. The studio of American Viewpoints was buzzing with energy. Staff members moved quickly, checking cameras and microphones. Security guards stood at each entrance, checking IDs carefully. This was no ordinary broadcast day. Peter Johnson sat at his desk, reviewing his notes one last time. He looked up as Nancy Wright approached. "Both guests have arrived," Nancy said. "They're in separate dressing rooms, as requested." "Any problems?" Peter asked. "No, but the tension is thick enough to cut with a knife," Nancy replied. "We've never had this many people request to be in the audience." "The phone hasn't stopped ringing," Peter nodded. "Make sure both guests have everything they need. And double-check all the documents we plan to display on screen. I want everything verified." In her dressing room, Jasmine Crockett sat calmly as a makeup artist finished her work. Ellen Morris stood nearby, holding a folder. "Remember, stay focused on the facts," Ellen advised. "Don't let her provoke an emotional response." "I won't," Jasmine promised. "I have truth on my side today." Danny poked his head in the door. "Just got word that the FBI has opened an investigation into Freedom Watch for the infiltration operation. It's not public yet, but it will be by this afternoon." Jasmine smiled slightly. Perfect timing. Down the hall, Candace Owens was having a heated phone conversation. "You assured me those documents were authentic," she said sharply. "Now I'm the one whose credibility is questioned." The voice on the other end belonged to Richard Bennett, the director of Freedom Watch. "The core information is accurate. Wells may have been overzealous in highlighting certain aspects." "Overzealous?" Candace interrupted. "He altered dates and removed context." "That's not highlighting, that's fabricating evidence." "The public doesn't care about these details," Richard insisted. "They only remember the big picture, that Crockett meets privately with corporations she criticizes publicly." "The public cares about the truth," Candace replied firmly. "And so do I. This conversation is over." She hung up the phone just as Greg Harris entered the room. "Everything okay?" Greg asked, noticing her expression. "No," Candace said. "Freedom Watch is trying to downplay the document alterations. I won't be their scapegoat." Greg looked worried. "What's the plan then?" "I'm going to be honest about what happened," Candace decided. "I'll acknowledge the documents had issues while standing by. My core concern about the private meetings." "That's risky," Greg warned. "Having my integrity questioned is riskier," Candace replied. 10 minutes before airtime, Peter gathered his production team for final instructions. "This is not about creating conflict for ratings," he told them. "This is about getting to the truth. Keep the cameras steady. Don't cut to reaction shots to inflame tensions. Let's practice responsible journalism today." The audience filled the studio seats, buzzing with anticipation. Security guards positioned themselves around the room. Then, the moment arrived. 3, 2, 1. The floor director pointed silently as the red light came on. "Good morning, and welcome to a special edition of American Viewpoints," Peter began, looking directly into the camera. 2 days ago, on this very set, a confrontation occurred that has since evolved into one of the biggest political stories of the year. Today, we bring back Representative Jasmine Crockett and commentator Candace Owens to address new developments in this ongoing situation. Ladies, thank you both for being here. The camera panned to show both women sitting across from each other. Jasmine wore a purple blazer, looking confident and composed. Candace wore a navy blue dress, her expression serious but determined. "Representative Crockett, let's begin with you," Peter said. "You've alleged that the documents presented by Ms. Owens contained alterations and were obtained through a staff member planted in your office. Can you elaborate?" Jasmine nodded. "Yes, Peter. We've confirmed that Ryan Wells was hired specifically by Freedom Watch to infiltrate my office. Bank records show he received payments from them before and during his employment with me. More concerning, we've discovered that he altered several documents before leaking them, changing dates and removing context to create a false impression." "Ms. Owens, were you aware of these alterations when you presented the documents?" Peter asked. "No, I was not," Candace answered directly. I received these documents from Freedom Watch with assurances they were authentic. I'm disturbed to learn they may have been altered. A murmur ran through the audience. This frank admission was unexpected. That said, Candace continued, my core concern remains valid. Representative Crockett did meet privately with executives from companies she publicly criticizes, and those meetings were kept off her public schedule. Jasmine leaned forward. Let me address that directly. Yes, I meet with various stakeholders, including business leaders. That's part of my job. These weren't secret meetings. They were private discussions to gather information. My positions and votes have consistently favored working families over corporate interests. If they weren't secret, why weren't they on your public schedule? Candace pressed. Some preliminary meetings are kept private to allow for candid discussions, Jasmine explained. Once these discussions lead to policy positions or votes, everything becomes public. This is standard practice in government. Peter displayed a document on the large screen behind them. This appears to be one of the altered emails. On the left is the version Ms. Owens presented. On the right is the original. You can see several key differences. The audience could clearly see how dates have been changed and sentences removed to change the meaning of the exchange. Ms. Owens, what's your response to seeing these alterations? Peter asked. Candace studied the screen, then turned to face the camera. I'm deeply troubled by what I'm seeing. I presented these documents in good faith, believing they were authentic. I owe the viewers and Representative Crockett an apology for not verifying their accuracy myself. The studio fell silent. No one had expected such a direct apology. However, Candace continued, I stand by my concern about transparency in government. Private meetings with corporations should be disclosed, even if they're just informational. Jasmine nodded. On that point, we might find some agreement. Transparency is essential to democracy, but so is the ability to have preliminary discussions, without everything becoming a media spectacle. For the next 30 minutes, the two women engaged in a surprisingly substantive discussion about government transparency, corporate influence, and public trust. The heated confrontation everyone expected had transformed into something more nuanced. As the segment neared its end, Peter asked for closing thoughts. Representative Crockett? This experience has been challenging, Jasmine admitted. But it's reinforced my commitment to transparency and integrity. I will continue fighting for working families, and I'll work to make more of my meetings public when possible. Ms. Owens? I came here today prepared to defend my position, but also to acknowledge mistakes, Candace said. We should all be committed to truth above partisan advantage. I still believe elected officials should be more transparent, but I regret the way this particular story unfolded. After the show ended, both women stood up. There was an awkward moment as they faced each other, cameras still rolling though, no longer broadcasting. Thank you for acknowledging the document issues, Jasmine said quietly. I value my integrity, Candace replied. And for what it's worth, I've ended my relationship with Freedom Watch over this. They didn't shake hands, but there was a mutual nod of respect before they walked off in different directions. Outside the studio, reporters crowded around for reactions. Viewers across the country discussed what they had seen. Some were disappointed by the lack of fireworks, while others found the honest conversation refreshing. That evening, Freedom Watch issued a statement denying any wrongdoing, but by then, few people believed them. The FBI investigation was now public, and Ryan Wells had agreed to cooperate in exchange for leniency. 1 week later, Jasmine implemented a new transparency policy, making more of her meetings public while still protecting sensitive discussions. Her approval ratings, which had dropped initially, rebounded to higher than before the controversy. Candace, meanwhile, published an essay about journalistic responsibility and the importance of verifying sources. She received both criticism and praise for her honesty, but most agreed she had handled a difficult situation with integrity. The incident that began as a political ambush had transformed into something unexpected, a moment of growth for both women and a rare example of accountability in public life. In living rooms across America, people who had tuned in expecting a fight witnessed something much more valuable: the difficult but essential process of finding truth in a complicated world.